Okay, so even the BBC News is covering the birth rate crisis. And the only reason why they are even paying attention to this issue is because it's gonna cause global economic issues. So let's check out the video and let's see what sort of a nonsense they're talking about.
Wherever you're watching, welcome to the programme. Now, it's been called the demographic time bomb, a shrinking population, but one that's getting older. It's a trend that's likely to have profound consequences for the global economy. And it comes too as governments are racking up huge debts that will be left to future generations to pay off. So what does it all mean for how we live? Well, overall, the global population is still growing. The UN is forecasting that it'll peak at 10.3 billion by the mid-2080s. But in many advanced economies, it's falling, with birth rates below the 2.
Yeah, so the first lie is that the global population is still growing. Yes, on the surface level, that is happening. The only reason that's still happening, even though we are under replacement rates, is because people keep living longer.
2.1 children needed to keep a population stable. Why? Well, a major UN study found that 39% of people said financial limitations were the main reason for having fewer children. In the UK, the decline in birth rates is typical of other advanced economies, and the average birth rate here is 1.5 children. Now, these people have been explaining some of the reasons behind that trend.
When we had Alex, who's 3 now, we always thought once he qualifies for his funded childcare, which is from January next year, that we would possibly then think about expanding our family, having another baby. However, if we did that next year, then we would possibly be into paying childcare fees for 2 children at the time that our remortgage is up.
Nursery prices and food prices and other stuff is just all things are just getting high in price, so it's just diminishing the chance for you to have second child.
I came out of med school with a lot of debt. At this moment in time, I don't think I could start a family on this wage at all. I'm a little bit older, and it pains me that I have to wait.
So the biggest issue is housing. People need homes in which they would have a stable environment in which they can actually raise the kids. Because of the social environment that was created, people are so separated from each other. Now you have enormous amounts of demand for housing. If you have a large population of people in their 30s, they haven't tied the knot with another individual. What that means, there's a woman that's 30 that has her own place, and there's another dude that's 30 that has his own place as well. Plus, it doesn't really help that the government is taxing home sales, and then the tax that was put on the house will eventually be passed on to the new buyer, fundamentally raising all home prices. Also, we got a bunch of massive corporations that are buying up houses above market rates, and the governments aren't doing anything. How about here's a policy that's gonna cost you zero? How about instead of implementing a bunch of socialist policies that already brought you to the position that you are right now, how about you actually enforce a law that actually makes sense? For example, companies cannot purchase residential properties. Residential properties are for individuals, not companies. Now, you can purchase as many homes as you want, but you will pay increasingly higher tax rate for each additional home that you buy, so that we wouldn't have this absolutely nonsensical structure at the moment where the biggest wealth creation is in the homes, is property. And that should not happen. I know for a fact that this is happening in Paris. There are literally buildings of residential property, flats, complete buildings empty, because investment firms and banks purchase up the homes because they know the general trend of property prices keeps going up. So it's a good return on investment to purchase those homes. Now there's less homes to go around, which creates scarcity, which raises the prices, plus the government taxes you, so you pass along the taxes onto the new owner. The new owner have to cover the taxes that the previous owner paid for the house.
Those people have powered the labour force in factories churning out Chinese-made goods sold to the rest of the world. But Xi Jinping's government is concerned about sustaining that economic growth. So recently said it will give parents $500 a year for each child under the age of 3 to help with costs. Here's what some parents in Beijing make of that plan.
For young couples who just got married and already have a baby, this might encourage them to have a second child. It will help ease the burden and offer some reassurance.
I think this is a good thing. Raising a child is costly, right? Education and all the other things. Compared to my generation, the costs have definitely increased. That includes food, education, healthcare, and all the basics.
Childcare subsidies can solve some of the short-term problems, but more importantly, in the long term, there are other issues such as who will take care of the children.
Well, it took just 11 years.
Who will take care of the kids? Don't worry, a government institution will take care of the kids, indoctrinate them in the same ideology that caused all of the issues, and then the cycle can continue. You know, in the next 10, 20 years, it's going to be really interesting to see the absolute cinema that's going to happen. China, they're going to experience some extreme hardships because of the one-child policy that they had. Now, the social narrative that's going on in China, it's extremely similar to the US and UK and practically all the Western countries. It's the exact same narrative that's prevailing. It's not actually men, it's the women that became ideologically radicalized to the point where men and women cannot even have a stable relationship unless you first agree with all of the political stances that each individual has. So that's a very high wall to climb over when you're trying to search for a partner.
Well, it took just 11 years for the global population to grow from 7 billion in 2011 to 8 billion by 2022. Better health, nutrition and medicine have prolonged how long we live. But that also costs money, and it's also getting more expensive to support a child. Research from the UN Population Fund found that economic barriers were the biggest reason for millions of people choosing to have fewer children. So I've been speaking to one of its senior leaders who's been tackling these challenges around the world for more than 30 years. Alana Armitage, welcome to Talking Business. Now, I know there's a lot of research been done into what the future of our global population looks like. You've got one called the State of the World Population Report, and it particularly looks at some of the issues around how people view their future when it comes to children. What does that report tell us? What does that research give us an insight into?
I think what's really exciting about this year's State of the World Population Report, which is called the Real Fertility Crisis, is that we're understanding that people's very personal decisions about wanting to have a child are actually directly related to how they see the global economy. So I think the big challenge for business, for governments, really is understanding that this is about our future human capital, right? So our study actually showed that one of the biggest reasons why young people today are finding it difficult to have the number of children they'd like to have is mainly for economic causes. So we actually interviewed 14,000 people in 14 different countries, and 1 in 5 said that they did not think that they would be able to have the number of children they wanted to have. And the 50% of those reported that the reason was financial precarity, economic precarity, whether that is lack of housing, whether that's job insecurity, or whether that is lack of affordable childcare. So what we are finding in UNFPA is that the real fertility crisis, it's not a crisis of people not wanting to have children. The crisis is really the gap between the desire to have children and what people feel they can actually achieve in today's economy.
So clearly on a family level, on a personal level, that is a huge decision for people to make. But talk to me about the wider implications here, because it strikes me that there has been, up until now maybe, a social contract between generations, one that says a younger generation will be at work and pay for an older generation that has retired. And given the squeeze on incomes, fewer people coming into the workforce, that contract has utterly broken down, hasn't it?
I think this is the biggest question for United Nations Population Fund. This is what is causing the greatest anxiety at the moment. And we're seeing that already in Europe, in Asia, where in many countries, 30% of the population is already over 65. So definitely this is a big issue.
Oh man, it's gonna be fun in the future. Oh boy, it's gonna be fun to witness it, but it's not gonna be very fun to live through it. So it's so hilarious how these bumbleclots want to talk about the social contract. Don't get it mistaken, it's the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, not the millennials. Millennials are responsible for the social degradation. Well, Gen X and baby boomers are also responsible for the social degradation, but they are more on the economical aspect. Because all of these socialist programs that these idiots are talking about led to massive deficits in Western countries in the first place. They took the immediate relief for the long-term consequences instead of, what generally people with any emphasis on duty and responsibility would think, that we're trying to leave a better life for the future generations. They did the opposite. Immediate relief for long-term consequences. Meaning they introduced socialist policies that racked up debt, and then future generations will have to pay off that debt. Even though millennials across all Western societies created an extremely large socialist welfare programs, they did experience the 2008 market crash, which completely destroyed their chances at having kids at a younger age. However, what is not excusable is the millennials' participation in the social degradation that happened. They are the ones who embraced and accepted the idiotic, radical ideologies that have overtaken Western civilizations to the point where societies can't even function no longer, where the opposite sexes can't even come together, because we don't even know what the opposite sex is.
However, one thing that I think is really important to keep in mind is that this is not happening overnight. This transition of age structures is actually something that we can plan for. Because if you see today, the 10 largest economies of the world, they all have below replacement fertility. So we need a new social contract. If we look at the way that our systems have been built, the models that we continue to have around pensions, education, health, they were pretty much built, over 50 years ago, in a sense, when people lived 30 years less. So we really need to radically rethink the way we are promoting these policies. We need an intergenerational social contract that reflects the demographic future that we're going to live in.
Guess what? I'm pretty sure that the younger generation is going to come to you and say, go F yourself with your new social contract when you failed your end of the bargain. How about that? That's exactly what's going to happen. And when she's talking about, we need to rethink it, the only thing that she can think of is saying, we have an issue. The only way that we can solve this issue, not by actually implementing some sort of maybe more aggressive rules or expectations of people to behave in a certain way. No, we have an issue, for example, daycare. We can just keep throwing money into this issue and it's gonna fix itself. And what these bumbleclots wanna always do, reference Norway, a country that has enormous amounts of oil. That's why they are extremely rich. That's why they can afford those socialist programs. Well, guess what? When countries who don't have the natural resources try to implement these socialistic programs, they start to rack up debt. And who's gonna pay that debt? Future generations.
That reflects the modern economy and the way it works.
What does that look like, though? Because in China's case, for example, the government there is suggesting they will make payments for people who have more kids. It's not as simple as just everybody having more children, is it?
So what we need is not short-term incentives, but rather long-term investment. And nothing is wrong with providing baby bonuses. But interestingly, if you look at the case of Norway and Sweden, they are two countries that have pretty good family policies, right? And what they have found is that their family policies were actually not addressing all the determinants to why people couldn't have the number of children they want. So that includes things like housing. And if you look across Europe, this is a huge issue, especially in Southern Europe, where fertility rates are so low. Also, the issue of the pressure that parents are feeling to be sort of perfect parents. We do need a new social contract, one that's intergenerational, one that actually supports the ecosystem for the whole ecosystem for the family, and not just these one-off payments.
But at the same time, we're told.
Can you see, Norway threw so much money into the system, and yet they still having the exact same problem. Why? Because the issue is not how much money you can give people. The issue is, it's the ideology that people have adopted. It's the social structure that was created. Fundamentally, I'm just gonna say it, it's feminism. Feminism have caused this.
Told that, demand for the world's natural resources will be under more pressure than ever, be that water, food, or other resource. And so what is the right strategy to take? Because on one hand, you need to keep the birth rate up to support the economy. On the other hand, though, we're all very conscious of the pressure that's putting on the world.
What is interesting is our report found that 1 in 5 people surveyed indicate that climate anxiety is actually keeping them from having the number of...
There we go, and that's what I'm talking about, the ideology that people adopt in their brains. How dumb do you have to be to think that I'm so scared of destroying the world? Who cares if the world is destroyed? You absolute idiots. Who cares? If there's no people on the planet, nobody cares if the planet does not exist. There needs to be people to justify why would you even care about the planet. This is a bigger issue because these bumbleclots attach a moral claim towards the climate change. As in, if you don't care about the environment, you're not a good person.
Factor in today's situation of young people not having the number of children they'd like to have. Having said that, we know that fertility itself is not directly linked to climate change. It's the consumption patterns that we need to look at. So many of the wealthier countries with low fertility are those that are most contributing to climate change.
Yeah, and therefore that in itself is a problem for government policy, but also for how we measure the success of an economy. I wonder too whether we need to be thinking about how we measure success in an economy and whether GDP is the right way of doing so, because that, as we've discussed, relies on a growing workforce producing ever more output.
Right. I mean, I think that's the key question, and especially for your show. Again, it is so interesting to see that the UNFPA report is really showing that these very personal decisions really reflect the health of the economy. It signals what's going on in the global economy, and it also signals that perhaps we need to look at different indicators. We certainly cannot be promoting any ideal population size or ideal population composition or any ideal fertility rate. We've seen in the past what that actually does to people. Demographic engineering is always harmful.
And I know this is a big question, and there's probably not one clear answer.
Demographic engineering is almost harmful. Their ideology is what caused this issue in the first place. You absolute dumb shits. Bro, they were talking about the overpopulation in the 50s. The more people that we have, the wealthier everybody got. Because there's more people producing stuff that everybody else can consume. There were less and less people who are starving. That was a byproduct of having a lot of people.
But let me ask you anyway. Is it your view that a growing population or a shrinking population is better for the future?
No. For the United Nations Population Fund, it's not about numbers, it's about choice. And it's about whether every individual has that possibility to achieve the dream that they have, whether it's...
Typical women's response. All feelings, no rational thought, no nothing. Zero zilch. Oh, people's feelings are more important. So if people choose that there's gonna be no future for anybody else, that's apparently good in her book. This is what happens when you have women in politics.
Have less children or to have no children at all.
Alana Armitage, it's been so good to talk to you on the programme this week. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Ben.
One of the big challenges for the future is how we pay for the world we want. Now that ranges from pensions and healthcare to comfortable living standards. It's about making our investments pay off in a way that provides for the future. Now they're all challenges that the Thinking Ahead Institute grapples with. It's a not-for-profit research institute founded by the global investment and pensions giant WTW, and I've been speaking to its boss. Marissa Hall, welcome to Talking Business. Good to have you here. And talk to me about that challenge of shrinking populations. I mean, the latest figures suggesting that the UN says by 2100, populations of some advanced economies will fall anything between 20 and 50%. What does that mean for their future, but also for the way we plan our economies?
It's an incredibly complex question. And I think what we're seeing here, as you rightly say, is that we have plunging birth rates and generally older populations. We already reached peak birth rates about 3 years ago. That was 146 million. And when you look at the statistics, you have countries like China, which I think over the next 25 years is set to lose 155 million people. But you also have people living longer, and I think that's actually a really great thing. But effectively, you have this demographic time bomb, and the strain can be quite pronounced, particularly when it comes to thinking about output of economies. So you have countries like Western Europe and advanced Asia and Greater China, where on average over the next few years, you're expecting to see a 0.4% drop in GDP per annum. What does that mean? We're talking about $10,000 per person over the next 25 years. And so what we see is the big issue here is the government's ability to provide education, to provide healthcare, to provide that safety net for individuals in the form of social.
Oh, again, it's the government. The government's your daddy. Come here, suck on these.
Security and a dignified retirement, because actually what you're having is this drop in GDP output.
It's not just about living longer, but it's about living well for longer. Yeah. And that clearly has a financial element and a health element. And, advances in medicine mean that we are living longer and able to be more healthier into older age. But financially, are we prepared enough?
Well, I think the preparation is absolutely the key. I think that's what we do a lot of our work here at WTW, which is working with organizations to make sure that individuals are able to build their personal pension pots for retirement. We always encourage people to save, but actually we've also got to encourage people to invest, because that's good for themselves to protect against future inflation or future recessions, but also it's good for the broader economy as a whole. So you've got countries like the UK, yes, New Zealand, Turkey, where they're very successfully introduced automatically enrolling individuals in pension vehicles. And it's something that is really an investment that can help mitigate some of the effects of this demographic time bomb.
We've got...
Oh, it ain't gonna help. So I'm wondering if the GDP, if the economy of these countries start to shrink, that means that the S&P 500 and all of these stocks that rely upon a large pool of different countries' economies, those stocks will start losing in value. And I don't think that has ever happened before. That means that people will start losing money.
Fewer people in work, so therefore paying ahead. You've got more older people retiring, expecting a pension that they would argue they've paid into all of their working lives. And at the same time, you've got a cost of living crisis where people are just struggling to afford their bills day to day, never mind being able to put a bit more money away for the future. It feels like a conundrum that is really hard to solve.
Yeah, and I think it's the financial cost of living side of things, but also what we see that actually there's a cultural element to this. So fertility rates have dropped significantly, and finance plays a major part of that. But also we have cultural issues such as, for instance, in Japan, where you have women focusing more on professional goals. You've got places like China where the one-child policy that was in place for many, many years has knock-on.
By the way, from China, what else to expect from communists? Just overgrown children who don't actually understand how world works. Again, listen, Feminism started this trend downwards. It basically started this one. Other economic issues that happen globally. This is gonna be the biggest one because there's no immediate solutions and there's no fast solutions. Any sort of solution that you might come up with, unless AI takes over the larger portion of the labor markets, which I don't think is gonna happen. It's minimum 20 years, 20, 30 years to see any sort of a trend upwards. And that's only if it changes right now, right this second, which it will never do. It's gonna be a couple decades for it to even shift, to have the society shift away from feminism, which, to be honest, I don't think it's gonna shift, so. We all are screwed. So let's hope that AI can pick up the slack because hey, it doesn't look that good, does it now?
An effect on current generations in terms of thinking about size of families. So I think when it comes to finances and thinking about your overall wealth journey, that has to be taken in tandem with the broader social issues and the broader literacy campaigns that we as a society need to be able to run to make sure that people invest and build that personal pension pot. For those lower income households that, it's very difficult to think about saving for retirement when you have financial difficulties right now.
We're focusing here on countries, of course, where populations are forecast to fall. There are some, particularly in the developing world, where populations are forecast to keep on growing. And I wonder, given the way that the current economic model is set up, do they stand to have a strong advantage in future, that they've got a growing young population that will be able to A, work and B, pay for the older generation?
What we're really talking about here are many countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So we're talking about Nigeria and Ethiopia and Kenya and Botswana, all of whom have younger populations and growing populations. But what you have in these cases is that still the GDP per capita of these countries and the living standards in these countries are no way equivalent to more advanced economies. They face this issue of trying to make sure that they get rich before they get old. So what does that mean? Well, you need to think about education, you need to think about healthcare, you need to think about jobs and transport and technology, yes, and infrastructure.
That doesn't really matter because once they get exposed to the same ideologies, they're going to fall for the same exact trap. It doesn't really matter.
But you also need to be able to think about how to create a sustainable retirement system that encourages the industry to be able to help citizens to build their wealth and to support broader growth.
But much like our personal budgets feeling a squeeze from the cost of living crisis, government budgets are really stretched too. I mean, there's a lot of concern about the debt to GDP ratio for many developed countries, often exceeding the size of their economies. And I wonder, therefore, all this debt that is being stored up for future generations with an expectation either you inflate it away or tomorrow's taxpayers will pay for it. Where does that leave us economically in future if there are fewer people able to pay back the debt that their parents' generation has racked up?
You've got places like the US where the debt to GDP ratio is something like 125%. And that was one of the main concerns around the recent Big Beautiful Bill, that increasing deficit, where in the US it's over $1 trillion annually. And countries like the UK, where actually you have 100% of debt to GDP. And you've also got, at the same time, weak productivity and these costly public services. And so what you're seeing here is that actually debt is hamstringing government's ability to be able to provide the essential services that they need. It's almost as if you're crowding out your ability to be able to spend on these other areas like healthcare and education and infrastructure. So it is a bit of an issue.
This is why you cannot have a democracy. It has to be an authoritarian system because you have a bunch of bumbleclots that are gonna come around talking about the government is not doing enough for you. Generational choices leave, for example, what this bumbleclot has said, enormous amounts of debts for the future generations to fix. It's no longer our problem. We raised you. That means that you owe us that. Like, get the Anyway, if you guys liked the video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and see you next time.